Actually also has a function for reading in Excel directly. You don't need any kind of extra package. Pandas can do it on its own. So to do that, we use the pd.readXL function. We'll show how to do it here. We're going to read in the draft data that was in that other folder we discovered earlier. So to do it, we're going to save a new variable draft for our data, pd.readXL. The first thing you want to pass in, again, is the file path where the data is. So this is the file path to the Excel file. And then you also need to specify what sheet you want to read the data from. Excel files can have many different worksheets within a workbook, so you have to direct it to which sheet you're reading from. So in this case, we're going to say sheet name equals draft 2015. I made this file up for this lesson, so I happen to know that it has a sheet called this. If you were doing this yourself, you'd have to perhaps go into your Excel file to make sure you were selecting the right sheet. So again, we'll run this to read the data in and call .head on it to make sure that we actually got it to work and we can see some data. You can see this is some NBA draft data from several years ago. It was ranking the different prospects from that year. Now I'll talk a little bit about reading data from the web. We're not actually going to go through code for doing this because with data on the web, it can come in so many different formats. It would be somewhat difficult to try to cover all the different ways you could go about reading data on the web. I will say that in general, the easiest way to load data from the web into Python is to first download the data set in a form that's easy to read in using one of the functions we already discussed earlier. So most websites, if they have data in the form of tables, will allow you to download it as a CSV or Excel file. That's very common. Figure out the file path or just put it in your current working directory and then use one of the reading functions that we already covered. If you're running Python locally, you can actually read data in from the clipboard by copy and pasting. So to do that, you would say select a bunch of cells on a website that has a table and do Control C to copy it. And then you can actually use the pd.readClipboard function, and that will try to read data in that you have stored on the clipboard. This can be somewhat finicky depending on the formats of things that you're copying from. And I can't actually show how to do that right now because I'm in Kaggle's online kernel environment. So if I copy anything to my clipboard, that's not something that the online environment is going to have access to, but just know that is something you can do. And alternatively, if you're not getting good formatting from that, one other thing you could try is to copy data and then paste it into a spreadsheet program, so like Excel, and then you can say clean up the data a bit and make sure that it looks decent, and then you could save it either as a CSV or Excel file and then read it in from that using the functions we talked about earlier.
I was always a good student.
Pandas also comes with a function called read_HTML. This will allow you to read data in directly from web pages. You do need the HTML5 lib package to use this. Nested data structures like HTML, JSON, and XML are found quite a bit on the web, but it's not something that you can easily read directly into a Pandas data frame. It's often something that requires a lot more work and using other packages outside of Pandas to process and kind of traverse the tree of data to get what you want. But we're not going to be covering how to read in those sorts of data types in this lesson. Each one has its own quirks and would kind of warrant its own unique lesson using the appropriate libraries to deal with it. So to close out this lesson, we'll learn how to write data using Pandas, and we're just going to learn how to write data to CSV. That's kind of the most common and easiest data format to work with, so that is what we're going to look at. So all you have to do to write data to CSV in Pandas is use the toCSV function. So you take an existing data frame. Right now we have a data frame stored as draft. So we take our data frame and say draft and use the .toCSV method, and then within the parentheses, you just pass in the file path you want to save it to. If you want to save it to the current working directory, you don't actually need a file path, you just give the file a name. So we're going to call this draftsaved.csv, and after we do that, we're just going to call lister on the directory we're in so that we can confirm that the current directory does have a new file in it after we write. So we'll run that, and we can see that in addition to these other folders we already knew were in here, we now have the file that we wrote, draftsave.csv. In the case of this Kaggle kernel environment, if we were working on machine learning competitions on Kaggle, we could save our prediction results to CSV just like this, and then after we save and run our kernel, we could then use it to submit our results to the competition. As you can see, Pandas makes it quite easy to read and write data using the Pandas library if you're dealing with common data formats. Databases and nested data formats are a little bit trickier to work with and may require using other packages outside of the ones we've learned about. But since Python is the most popular language for doing data analytics, it has libraries that can deal with just about any data format you could think of. So just know that if you ever have to work with a data type that you haven't encountered before and you don't know how to work with it, you should be able to find a Python library that can help you load it in and parse it just by doing a bit of research online and, say, reading the documentation for a new package. Now that we know how to read data into Python, we're almost ready to start learning how to do data analysis. But before we do that, we're going to learn about some basic Python programming constructs and how to write our own custom functions in Python. That will allow us to write our own code and perform tasks that might not be easy to do using built-in functions. So in the next lesson, we're going to start learning the basics of writing our own code in Python with a lesson on control flow, which will include using if and else logic as well as for and while loops in order to get the computer to run code in the way we want it to. If you found this video useful, you can drop a like or hit subscribe, and I will see you again next time.